Relationships can catch us off guard at times. You're riding high, thinking everything's okay, when you find yourself sitting across from someone who's informing you that it's over. Looking back, the warning signs were likely there. The little changes in words, the slow emotional drift apart, the shift in how she spoke of the future. Most relationships don't blow up overnight. There's always a slow burn, a gradual drifting apart that happens far ahead of anyone ever officially breaking up. I've seen this pattern repeat itself hundreds of times between friends, family members, and yes, even in my own romantic relationships. It's painful to admit, but sometimes we really do miss what's right in front of us. I remember dining with my friend Chris last year. He was discussing some argument he'd had with his girlfriend Jessica. She said she didn't know whether our values still aligned, he said, randomly grabbing another piece of pizza. I nearly vomited my drink. Having aided in the demise of enough of my friends' relationships, I knew that precise sentence was quicksand for relationship doom. 6 weeks after this conversation, Jessica was out. Chris was amazed and dumbfounded, wondering why he never saw it coming. But the warning did exist in her words. He simply did not know how to decipher it. The reality is most individuals don't just up and quit a relationship. There's usually some time of emotional and mental separation that occurs beforehand. Throughout this time, there are certain words and patterns of communication that occur that indicate a person has started emotionally detaching from the relationship. Being able to pick up on these verbal signals may provide you with an opportunity to deal with problems before they become too far gone, or at least ready yourself for what may be ahead. When someone starts to think about ending a relationship, their language also shifts in some subtle but profound ways. At times, it's not as much what's being said as how it's being said, when it's being said, and what's no longer being said. They can be so incremental that you won't notice them until they've collectively formed something significant. I've listened to scores of audio recordings of couples therapy sessions. Don't worry, I'm doing it for research, and the patterns of speech of someone who's tuned out in their head are remarkably consistent. One of the best identifiers is when we becomes I. This happens as a person begins to fantasize about their own life without yours. We should go try out that new restaurant becomes, I might go try out that new restaurant. We must plan our holiday becomes, I don't know what I'm doing next summer. This pronoun drop is not a random phenomenon. It's an interior psychological shift of decoupling identities and horizons. If we falls out of her vocabulary, it might have fallen out of her future too. I witnessed this with my sister and her ex. For months before they broke up, he started dropping the when we buy a house type of comments and substituting, if I ever buy property instead. The shift was subtle but clear. He was psyching himself out for life without her, and his words were the first place it showed. By the time he actually broke things off, he'd been rehearsing a solo life in his head for months. Another red flag occurs when future talk gets decidedly vague, or does not happen at all. A person who's contemplating an exit strategy tends to feel uncomfortable making plans more than a certain period of time in the future. If she used to talk enthusiastically about next summer vacation or long-term aspirations, but now gets evasive or speaks vaguely when the topic of future plans arises, that is one to heed. It's not that she is incapable of planning. It's that she has no idea whether she wants to plan with you. Time markers are particularly revealing. If forever and always have been replaced with for now, or at this point, that temporal shift suggests uncertainty regarding the duration of the relationship. Even tiny qualifiers like, right now I feel like we're good together, instead of we're good together, suggest she's considering the relationship temporary, not long-term. These aren't sloppy word substitutions. They're glimpses at how someone is conceptualizing the relationship in their head. My cousin dated a woman for 3 years. In the last months, he told me that he noticed she had started saying things like the apartment you're staying in instead of our apartment, and that dinner party you wish to have instead of our dinner party. She had begun to psychically remove her identity from his and their shared life. The couple ended 6 weeks later. The most glaringly obvious verbal clue would be when comparison shopping starts to occur aloud. Phrases such as, my friend's boyfriend always surprises her with little things, or Sarah and Mike never fight about chores, can sound like nothing more than innocent observations. They're not. They're benchmarking, comparing your relationship to others and falling short. When these comparisons begin occurring on a regular basis, it usually means she's actively questioning whether she could be happier with someone else or even alone. "I need space" is such a breakup cliche that we almost ridicule it. But it's so commonly the first harsh expression that someone is having second thoughts about the relationship. Space itself is not anything bad. Healthy relationships respect people's autonomy. Timing is everything. If "I need space" comes on the heels of repeated emotional withdrawal or in tandem with other warning signs, it's usually the beginning of an irreversible departure. It's a way of experiencing what life is like with a bit less you in it. I had a painful experience with this in my late 20s. My then girlfriend started telling me she needed more independence and time to work on herself. I supported this, thinking it was about her personal growth. It was just not within the context of our relationship. She was slowly drifting away, testing to see if she enjoyed life without the confines of the relationship. It turned out she did. Another subtle yet powerful hint is in how she describes issues. If relationship issues had once been described as things we need to work out together, but are now instead described as character assessments like "that's just the way you are," or "this is your pattern," it means she's no longer describing the problems as fixable. She's labeling you and the relationship as incompatible by nature, not temporarily dysfunctional. This shift in narrative typically builds to a decision already in process. Catch when emotional speech changes. 2. When "I love the way you always make me laugh" is changed to "you're a funny person." That's a change from personal identification to objective report. She's changed from talking about how she feels about you to just reporting about you, as if from afar. Emotional disconnection rarely happens by accident. It's a coping mechanism when one begins building psychological distance. One of the painful things that typically precedes a breakup is some form of "I love you, but I'm not in love with you." It's a cliche because it is based on something, the difference between loving someone and being in love with someone. When someone says that, they are usually attempting to soften the blow while explaining to themselves why they're doing it. They're acknowledging the history and commonality and creating an effective space under which departure will be the only logical choice. My 8-year wife's husband said to her exactly those words. 3 weeks later, he departed. In hindsight, she recognized he'd been drawing away emotionally for months, taking more business trips than necessary, working late at night after she was in bed, making single-fisted financial decisions that were always mutual. The remark wasn't out of the blue. It was the culmination of a prolonged period of separation already well established on the inside. Other times, the warning signs aren't in what you say, but in what you no longer say. When topics that were relationship cornerstones, future children, growing old together, shared financial dreams, become conversational sinkholes, that's typically avoidance. She's not talking about these shared dreams because she's questioning whether they'll be shared at all. Future talk is deceitful when you're contemplating an end. I have noticed, too, that people who are considering leaving will often start emphasizing differences rather than similarities. "We're just so different people," or "we want so differently," may be factually true things to state. Most couples are different, but to suddenly start emphasizing them suggests she's psychologically keeping track of how the relationship won't work out in the future. She's arguing, not just talking. There's also a curious phenomenon that if one is moving towards a breakup, he or she will sometimes pick a fight over something that may seem very inconsequential. They're not really about the dirty coffee cup or the towel on the floor. They're about blame, emotional space, and sometimes even trying to get you to initiate the breakup. If minor squabbles explode suddenly and dramatically, or she appears to be reacting in ways that feel out of proportion, there could be an underlying larger emotional process at work. Conflict communication style can be particularly telling. If the discussions which previously aimed towards resolution now end with brush-off comments like "whatever you say" or "fine, have it your way," that shows she's no longer putting effort into resolution. When one doesn't envision a future for the relationship, one no longer puts effort into mending its current problems. Why fix what you're going to leave? One of the most heartbreaking language shifts is when the words of endearment and affection are replaced. When babe and love get replaced by your real name. When declarations of love that become daily routines are withdrawn. when phrases of affection become sounded formal or obligatory rather than sincere. These are indicators of a cooling of emotions that often means a relationship breakup. This is not to say that all relationships need constant verbal reassurance, but a sharp decline from what you both once were can be significant. It's also important to remember that none of these communication hints, in and of themselves, necessarily mean your relationship is in trouble. Context is enormous. Stress in life, mental illness, or temporary relationship stress can all affect the way a person speaks. The key to watch out for is patterns and changes from your usual, especially when a number of signs happen at once or over a long period of time. What do you do if you see these warning signs? Denial is tempting but rarely helpful. Straightforward, non-accusatory communication is most likely to succeed. I've noticed you're not making plans for next year, or it feels like something has shifted in the way we're connecting lately, encourages you to talk without demanding a confrontation. Prepare for honesty that may be painful to hear. If she is contemplating leaving, your willingness and sensitivity to confronting issues could offer an avenue for recovery, or it might just accelerate an already in progress finale. Either way, a good picture will do you better than a confusion. Savable relationships most of the time require both of you to realize the problems. Unsavable ones will play out their course with or without you realizing it's occurring. Recognizing signs just makes you have some say in it and perhaps even grant you some degree of dignity and self-respect throughout the unpleasant process. I've seen relationships turn back from the brink when both people really want to reconnect. I've also seen the faces of friends light up with relief when they finally acknowledge what they've secretly known for months, that the relationship is ending. Either scenario requires reality acceptance, not wishes that communication problems will magically fix themselves. Keep in mind also that language patterns indicate internal processes, but do not create them. Emotional shifting has already begun by the time concernful phrases begin appearing. This doesn't equate to reconciliation being impossible, but it does mean that surface repairs are not usually enough to resolve the issues at hand. Genuine repair involves both parties making a commitment to figure out what caused the disconnection in the first place. The clues are there if we notice. The creeping pronoun changes, the distancing of time, the comparative judgments, the effective distancing masquerading as palaver. None of it happens by accident. Our words give away our hearts, even when, and perhaps most particularly when, we're trying to hide what's happening inside them. Working the skill of being able to hear not only what is said, but how it is said may be the single most valuable relationship skill we can learn.